are chatting with Lynda MacGibbon about her brand new book, My Vertical Neighborhood. Lynda, thank you so much for taking the time to chat today.
Thank you. I'm really looking forward to it.
What a fascinating title this is, My Vertical Neighborhood. You moved from the Maritimes to downtown Toronto, so to speak, and that is what kind of sparked you to write this book. Tell us a little bit about that process.
Sure. I moved to Toronto about 9-10 years ago with a job transfer. And I moved from a house in a suburb to a high-rise apartment building on the shores of Lake Ontario. In a vertical neighborhood. All around me are high-rises, so a very different kind of life. When I moved here and moved into this, I didn't do it with the idea that I would ever write a book about it. But the story that unfolded as I began to live into my neighborhood and think about the question that is central to the book, why love our neighbors, began to unfold, which ultimately resulted in the book being written.
I think for a lot of people, when we think of the phrase love your neighbor, that's a pretty select thing in our minds. I love my neighbor. Oh, that guy at church that talks about the things that I'm interested in, I love him. He's great. But you're taking it literally as well. You're talking about your neighbor and the person in apartment 3C or whatever. You're talking about your literal neighbor in this. How did you kind of land on that as an idea to live out your life when you moved to Toronto?
You know, probably 15 years ago, maybe a little longer, I heard the author Michael Frost speak in Canada. He's written the book Incarnate, lots of other books. He's a missiologist, but I heard him speak specifically about what it meant for him to move into a neighborhood with the idea that he would love his neighbors. I was really inspired by that talk, and it sort of sat in the back of my mind for a long time. But like many people, many Christians, you know, I was really ensconced in a church. I lived in Moncton, New Brunswick for 20 plus years. I had friends, family, my patterns were set. Right. But when I moved to Toronto, I decided maybe this is my opportunity to try to figure out what that commandment actually means. I have a clean slate, I can reset. So I decided I would move into my condo building and leave space in my life to meet neighbors and see if they actually could become the center of my life as opposed to the add-ons in my life. Right. So I wouldn't find it through church. I wouldn't necessarily find it through the Christian organization I worked through, although I had all those opportunities. I would really try to keep space in my life to meet neighbors, the people who were right around me all the time.
Right, and so more than just a nod on the elevator, this is connecting in a purposeful way with
That's right.
Who live around you. I mean, it's going to be a question I think that you'll probably get asked 100 times. There must be times when you meet a neighbor and it's not so easy to, you know, break down the walls and form a relationship with them. What are some of the strategies you've used to kind of help break down those walls?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it was really difficult for me to meet my neighbors, especially as a person living on her own in a building. Fortunately for me, a colleague and a friend moved into the building as well about a year after me. She also was quite committed to meeting neighbors. So we started to do things together. So I think having somebody who shares your interest and shares the concern about this, doing it together is really helpful. But then it's just being intentional. So we threw lots of open door dinners. We started some things like a writers group in the building. We threw a Christmas morning event for people who wanted to come. We just were available. And then, but also I think, you know, as Christians, as followers of Jesus who said, love your neighbor, it's up to us to be somewhat intentional about, well, what does that really look like for me? What activities can I do? How can I posture myself? Even in this period with COVID, I think I often have in the back of my mind, even if I go for a walk, as I encounter people on my walk, will I smile at them or say hello, or will I keep my head down and just keep going? It can be something as simple as that. But there is an intentionality. I think that as I asked God that question, what does it look like to really love neighbors? I started to come to some ideas like, oh, it looks like saying hello to people. But if they seem like they want to take the friendship or the conversation further, then it looks like making time in my life for that.
Right. Without naming names, is there an example of someone that you met, they were a complete stranger, the conversation started, and now you consider them a very close friend?
Yeah, actually, the book centers around 10 of us who became friends. Now, not all of those people are still in my life, but some of them are still very much in my life. And even the ones that aren't in my life today, because neighbors come and go, I would still say that they became extremely good friends. So I have a neighbor, actually he's moved away, but in the book I call him Brian. I've changed people's names in this book to protect their privacy. But he moved away. We are still in touch all of the time. He's the kind of person who's done really helpful things for me, like help me sell a car online when I was nervous about doing that. So just practical, but also with whom I have really in-depth conversations on an ongoing basis. So there are quite a few people who became fast friends. And then other people who, you know, were here for a meal or two, and then they moved on in their life and I moved on in mine. And I think that's one of the truths about loving our neighbors is it's not necessarily like a family member or somebody who might be your lifelong friend. You're kind of in this relationship for as long as God would have you in it. And paying attention to it for as long as God would have you pay attention to it is what's important in the context of neighbors.
Right.
Yeah.
Lynda, thank you so much for telling us about My Vertical Neighborhood. Looking forward to its release towards the end of March, and wish you all the success with this book.
Thank you so much. I've appreciated the conversation today.